Hey, it's Fox from InfernoFox Gaming. I recently thought about what got me into video games, especially after the interview that I had with my dad here on InfernoFox Gaming for Father's Day. The link to that will be in the description below. I started to deeply reflect on my own experiences, how I was first introduced to video games, and wonder where, really this all came from. But as soon as I did, I started to be curious about these types of beginnings for some of my fellow YouTube content creators that are around the same age as me, or perhaps a little older. And while we all have had our own formative relationship with video games in general, we all have very specific memories on how we got into the RPG genre. Games in said genre provide us with experiences that are often unique to any of the other, perhaps more action-esque games that maybe we've also grown up with. RPGs provide us with a wide swath of emotion, from being immersed into their respective stories and character development to even engaging soundtracks and heart-pumping battle systems. But I won't take the wind out of my fellow collaborators' sails here. Let's hear from these wonderful content creators. And if you like my or any of these creators' content, please make sure that you subscribe here, as well as check out and subscribe to their channels, again, which are linked in the description below.
Hi there everybody, this is David over at the channel davidvinc, and thank you so much InfernoFox for having me on. My childhood isn't something that I especially talk about that much over on my channel. It's not something that is a very happy time for me. So looking back on this did bring up quite a few memories, some good, some really bad. But I just want to talk to y'all about what it was like growing up playing RPGs and being a gamer in the 1980s and the 1990s. I come from a very, very, very small town in the very deep south called Acworth, Georgia. It was a really nice place to grow up. It was beautiful, but it was also extraordinarily remote. We're talking 20 plus minutes just to go to the grocery store, over an hour just to go to the mall. Like, it was really remote. Whenever we first moved there in the 1980s, there was roughly 3,000 people living there. By the 1990s, a whole 4,000! And by the time that I left for college in the year 2000, 13,000 people lived in the huge, bustling metropolis of Acworth. Video games weren't something that my parents supported all that much. As my father said, they were for nerds, dorks, and weirdos. And he was a football player, and my mother was a cheerleader, so they didn't exactly support my more nerdy hobbies, but I didn't let that dissuade me, because there was literally nothing else to do. It was such a small town. Like, I'm telling y'all, you have no idea. We would get, a new video game, every birthday or Christmas or so, and I would always focus on the RPGs because they gave me a lot of bang for my buck. They had a lot of length to them, and I really did enjoy them. And that was also whenever my mother was more on board with me playing these video games, because she saw the types of games that I played. It had reading, it had writing, it had math, it had arithmetic, it had numbers. So she saw it as kind of helping me through school as I played Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy and all these other RPGs. And then also, once a week or so, whenever my mother would go shopping at the grocery store, which was the Battle Foods, which I ended up looking up just for this video. I wanted to find a logo because it's kind of ridiculous if you've never seen the Battle Foods logo. It has Confederate soldiers fighting Union soldiers with a cannon over them. Yeah, that's where I grew up. There was a video Wonderland inside the Battle Foods, and we would get to rent some games there. And I do remember one time my mother rented Crystalis for me, and I really, really, really liked it. And I asked her if I could just buy it and keep it. And she's like, well, I'll ask the store people. So she went there the next day and she said, hey, can I just buy Crystalis? And they go, no, you have to return it. And she's like, okay, well, I'll just keep it then. Then she went back the next day. She looked to make sure that worker that she talked to the first time wasn't there. And she said, oh, you know what? I lost Crystalis. I'm just going to pay the fee or whatever. And it was $20, but by the time that she paid the $20, the other worker that was there the day before came out of the back room and was like, she didn't lose it, she was here the other day saying that she wanted to buy it. And my mother was like, oh well, I got it now. And she ran out the door with Crystalis, so Yeah, that was my childhood. We would go to the mall on the weekends. I would put like a little pocket notebook in my pocket so that I could read the strategy guides and like write down what was going on in the game if I was stuck in a particular game, because I couldn't, afford the actual strategy guides themselves. But that's what I did in my time, play games, hang out with my friends, jump in the pool, swim in the lake. There wasn't a whole lot else to do in teeny tiny Ackworth, Georgia, besides play these games, so I guess it kind of molded me into the person that I am. I'm glad that I grew up there. I hated it as a kid, but I'm definitely glad that I had this kind of cloistered, living under a rock sort of childhood. It was a whole lot of fun. Thank you again, InfernoFox, for having me on your channel, and I do hope to see all of y'all over at my channel, davidvinc. Have a good day.
Hey everybody, it's femtrooper, and thank you, Glenn, for having me on this one, because I definitely grew up on RPGs. Now, I didn't play tons of RPGs when I was a little kid, but I can tell you that the ones I did play had a huge impact. I mean, right there, Earthbound, my favorite game of all time, probably one of the first RPGs I ever played in my entire life. It was either that or it was Super Mario RPG. And the Super Nintendo was sort of my big first system, and man, I just love those two games. And Earthbound has a very special place in my heart. It's so different because, the reality is I grew up playing a ton of side-scrolling platformers. That was a big deal. Even if they weren't true platformers and they were more action-adventure or, they had other elements, they were all side-scrolling. So games that were aerial view, isometric, and, you could see houses, it was so different. It was unique. You were walking around and talking to people and buying items and going into a store, going into someone's house. This was not something you saw in a platformer. And so when I was a little kid, completely just blown away. While Earthbound and Super Mario RPG are huge influences for me, and Earthbound is my favorite game of all time, so obviously huge fan, I have to say the game that kind of solidified the deal and was like, you like this genre, was Pokemon Blue. Oh my god, Pokemon Blue, wow, is the first time I truly understood what I was doing, the first time I truly, got the genre. I get it, I understand this, I know exactly what I need to do, I had my guide, I was obsessed with Pokemon in every way, but the game holds a very special place in my heart. Holy smokes, it's one of the best games of all time for me. It's one of my favorite games. It changed so much, and it made so many people get into the genre. Kind of like how Final Fantasy VII made a lot of people into JRPG fans. Pokemon Blue did that for me, and I think it did it for a lot of kids. And we didn't even realize we were playing an RPG, but we were, and we were obsessed with it. And my favorite JRPG, my favorite style of JRPG to this day is the Pokemon style. The big world adventure, going to several towns, meeting all sorts of different people, wacky things happen. You don't have a big party in terms of people, because it's your Pokemon that are the party, but it's the big adventure thing. I was so excited every time I left a town and I'd walk through, I'd be on route whatever, and then knowing that I would get to a town, oh man, the best. I am a lifelong fan of the genre. I love role-playing games. I just love going on adventures, meeting different people for your party, and just exploring a crazy, unique world with an amazing story and an amazing soundtrack. That's what the genre is. It's the best genre, and I'm so happy to talk about it today. Thank you again, Glenn, for having me on today. I could talk about JRPGs all day long, seriously, and we all could. So, obviously, I'm excited to see what everybody else has talked about or reminisced about, because, man, RPGs are the best.
Hey friends, it's Brandon from JustTheGems. Thanks to InfernoFox for having me on to talk about growing up on JRPGs. I started playing video games at 4 or 5 years old, and I absolutely loved getting lost in those worlds. Even simple games like Super Mario Bros. Were awe-inspiring for me. But it wasn't until I played the original Dragon Warrior at the time, that I truly understood how enormous games could be. As much as I loved running through the Mushroom Kingdom and stomping on Goombas, Dragon Warrior really expanded my mind. I wasn't restricted to a 2D plane anymore. I could go anywhere. One minute I'm in a castle, then I'm in a town, then I'm in a forest, in a cave, and it was sort of overwhelming. And honestly, I was nowhere near good enough to actually beat the game, but playing it was so much fun, and I knew I needed to find more games like it. It's not that I stopped playing other games. I've always loved Mario and Sonic, and heck, I even played Bubsy back in the day. I enjoyed Mario Kart and Mutant League Football, but my true love was JRPGs. Once I played the Final Fantasy series, I think that's the moment that everything really solidified for me, that I truly understood that this was my genre. This was the sort of game that scratched this particular itch like no other game could. My love of the genre has carried over to this day. Of course, as an adult with responsibilities, preferring games that take 80 to 100 hours to beat makes my life a bit more difficult. But I can't deny that I get the most fulfillment from JRPGs. The stories, the characters, the combat, everything works together to create epic experiences that I just can't get anywhere else. And honestly, after 35 years of JRPGs, I can't see that changing.
Hey folks, Jay from Cold Nights here. My good friend Fox posed the question, what was it like growing up RPG? I'm going to share my little story with you. Let's get into it. There are a few things that comforted me, like the title screen and opening song of Final Fantasy VII. Sure, by the time the game released, I had been playing video games for years. I was obsessed with Street Fighter II. I had mastered Sonic the Hedgehog and defeated Bowser and Wart in every Mario game. I had never come across something quite like Final Fantasy VII, though. I hadn't matured into my JRPG-loving self at this point in my life. I was more worried about Donkey Kong Country and UN Squadron than I was Earthbound or Lufia. Sure, I knew about them, but it never really drew me in. That was until I saw the cover of Final Fantasy VII. That man, that giant sword. Was that a huge robot or some fortress that he was facing down? I was intrigued. After a bit of whining to my parents about needing a new game and a trip to Walmart, the course of my gaming life changed forever. Was it the pre-rendered backgrounds? The, believe it or not, incredible polygonal graphics of the characters at the time? I was hooked. How could a game cover so much emotional, relevant material? A struggle against corporate greed and corruption? A fight for the planet. Love. And loss. Oh, the loss. I learned through playing Final Fantasy VII that games could be more than platforming. More than fighting or racing. They could have meaning. They could bring you to tears. Immediately after voraciously consuming 7, I moved on to the next Square masterpiece I could get my hands on. The booklet suggested Bushido Blade, loved it, and a quaint little title known as Final Fantasy Tactics. The opening was incredible, what a cutscene, and it immediately led into the battle at Orban Monastery and the kidnapping of the princess. Before I even came to love the grid-based tactical combat, I was hooked by the unfolding tale of lineage, succession, war, and royal intrigue. I credit Tactics with developing my love for both the strategic combat of such games and that form of storytelling, which I'd later come to adore in series like Fire Emblem and Suikoden. I was lucky enough to grow up in a time where games were truly developing into grand tales. The myriad combat systems and leveling schemes are great, but RPGs, especially those early PS1 titles from Square, could move your heart and stimulate your mind more than 1-ups and rings ever could. This has been Jay from Cold Nights. Thanks so much for inviting me to this collab, Fox. Until next time.
I hope you've enjoyed everyone's own experiences growing up and getting introduced to RPGs. Like Brandon from JustTheGems and femtrooper, I too have cut my teeth on platformers like the Mario series, or even arcade-like experiences with the likes of Contra and Life Force. I often played these games with my 2 older brothers, and we also had RPG-like experiences with Zelda's 1 and 2 and Faxanadu. But it wasn't until we played Final Fantasy on the NES in 1990 that we really got into the more traditional representation of the RPG genre. This entry only allowed 1 save file within it. With 2 older brothers, you can easily guess that I wasn't the first one to play it. Yet my time watching my brothers play Final Fantasy was not wasted. We reveled in our victories and shared in our defeats. And this was an early RPG. You can bet there were a lot of defeats. I'm looking at you, Ice Cave. When we got the SNES for Christmas late the next year, we got the second Final Fantasy game a couple months after that. Thank goodness that it had 4 save files, as it allowed each of us our own chance to see the hero Cecil conquer the evil Golbez. This entry was what really saw me come into my own with the RPG genre itself. I was really drawn to the active time battle system that was introduced, along with the expressive sprites and the fantastic soundtrack. Both my older brothers noticed my affinity for this game, even as they both found themselves getting older and maybe having their interest sort of wane in video games overall. They often had me help them earn their guys experience points by grinding through battles to help their files' characters level up, and even encouraged me to write a novelization of the game itself. Unfortunately, a 9-year-old version's writing isn't quite up to the level of quality one would expect of such a novelization, though I still stand by the fact that it would have been better than this original version, American version, of the game's translation and localization. I'd be remiss, though, if I didn't mention the release of Final Fantasy III. Again, 6th entry in actuality, a couple years later after. And this entry solidified my love of RPGs, and it was this entry in particular that became my favorite entry of all time. I mean, come on, I cosplayed as Locke, my favorite character, before cosplaying was even a thing. As I grew through my childhood to being a teenager, I honestly didn't really feel isolated from being a fan of RPGs or even video games themselves. Many kids my age, even if they didn't like or play video games, really didn't harass the short kid in class who brought video game manuals to read when it came time to do homework. The turning point when these games became more mainstream was with the release, of course, of Final Fantasy VII for the PlayStation. Suddenly, RPGs were more mainstream and people were playing them more than ever before. I felt back then a lot of excitement that there were more people getting into these games. I mean, hey, more opportunities to get more friends and share mutual experiences, just like I do now whenever people get more acquainted with beloved video game genres, series, entries, and the like. Now, as an adult, I've gained so much from the Final Fantasy series and from RPGs in general. This includes stuff as banal as learning to set a budget and spend money more carefully, which is thanks to the first Final Fantasy entry for teaching me how to buy weapons and items on a budget. But I also learned to be able to express emotion from various events in the games that resonated with me in real life, such as some of the heartbreaking moments in Final Fantasy III and VII, or even the celebratory moments in the same. I've also gained a great number of friends over the many years thanks to my love of this genre, and I'm excited to continue and gain more such friends, both with fellow content creators and you, my audience. But this video does not end with me. Instead, I'd like to conclude with a piece from special guest Britta Food for Dogs. Now, she didn't specifically grow up with RPGs. Instead, she can provide how it was to grow into them later in life. And she brings such a wonderful perspective as to how they not only positively influenced her, but the benefits that RPGs themselves can bring to others.
Hello, I'm Britta, and my channel is Food for Dogs. Growing up on RPGs. Obviously, I didn't grow up on video games. They didn't exist in my childhood. So, what am I doing here? I would like to thank Glenn for thinking outside the box and inviting me here for an almost reverse perspective. What's it like growing into RPGs at a much older age? I made a video years ago in my Tech of My Childhood series where I traced the connections between reading books and playing RPGs. Games foster imagination and creative thinking. just like the main forms of entertainment in my childhood, storybooks, and then the emerging new medium of TV. To me, it's an easy and seamless transition. As an older adult, it's energizing, even liberating to jump back into the enthusiasm of childhood for adventures. The wonderful author Connie Willis described this so well in one of her speeches. So I'll just quote. Characters and stories grow up and go off on quests and fall in love and explore strange planets, travel through time and solve mysteries and save the kingdom. And in the process, they tell us about ourselves. They teach us how to be human. If that's not a description of a classic RPG, then I don't know what is. The connection between storytelling and RPGs is very clear to me. I love the RPGs, especially from the period 1990s to 2000s. My first experience was with PlayStation 1 classics, and I then went on to discover many others. I firmly believe that children who grow up with quality RPGs have a head start in life. They develop a good grasp of problem solving, multiple perspectives, and above all, emotional intelligence. Thank you.